Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're due to start our webinar in just a few moments. I just want to check to make sure that everyone can hear us quite clearly. You do have the options to type in some questions and give some feedback. So if anyone wants to just type in and let us know that you're all hearing us loud and clear, would be much appreciated. Okay, thank you very much, especially Lorna, Barbara, Kate, George, Adrian, Gemma, and Barbara. Thank you very much. So we know that we are coming across to you and you can hear us clearly. So welcome to the Mediating Mental Health webinar. Now, you may be asking, why are we doing this? Well, it's two reasons. Mainly, it's because of feedback from our clients and delegates that we work with when having challenges in resolving conflict in many difficult situations. But also, we understand that a lot of mediators need something to help them in their CPD and development. And in January, around the 15th or 16th, TCM will be putting on a CPD event specifically about mediation and mental health. So today is just a very snippet of some of the interesting topics, factors, tools, and considerations that we'll be going into great detail with on the actual event. So you're here today with myself, Jerome Witter, who you'll hopefully see my face shortly. I'm a senior resolution consultant at the TCM group, and I'm also joined today by my esteemed colleague.
Hello everyone, I'm Giles. I'm also a senior resolution consultant here at TCM group.
So Giles also has some experience in previous job roles in working with issues around mental health and mental ill health.
Yes, before I started working for the TCM group, I was an employee of Samaritans, so obviously, and I'm an active listening volunteer for Samaritans, so I have come across a number of people who have relations with Samaritans who have experienced poor mental health.
Thank you, Giles. And obviously, as mediators, a lot of the cases that we have can sometimes have involved at least allegations or suggestions, and sometimes confirmation around mental health being an issue or a concern when mediating cases. So if you don't know us, hopefully you'll get to know us soon. We are the TCM group. We've been in business for about 14 years, specifically working with organizations providing mediation services, providing mediation training, working with employee and industrial relations, trying to bring the power of mediations out into the mainstream world. So we've set up over 300 integrated resolution schemes. Myself, Giles, and we also have another full team of mediators and trainers here, really looking to provide a world-class service in what we do. So I think it's probably time that we start looking at the issues that we face. So if we think about conflict, we've all experienced worry, irritability, stress, sleeping problems, anxiety, maybe even paranoia, and these are probably sometimes the symptoms of what we would say mental ill health. Yet we're still probably most of the time able to go about our daily lives and activities. Now, our webinar today is not about diagnosing mental health, but it's about trying to understand the people who come to mediation who may be suffering from various degrees of mental distress and their ability to participate in the mediation process.
And so, as Jerome says, I think it's the way I like to think of it is that everyone, like physical health, is on a mental health scale, and it's some days people will be done the narrow end of that wedge, but sometimes people in their working life will be trying to interact at a very high level of mental ill health, and it needs to be recognised that some days people will present differently, and that's very important for mediation as well. You can only deal with people the parties on the day, and sometimes it's maybe that they are having a day where they are not in a mental health space.
I've had a few of those on a Monday morning, I can say, and obviously, when it comes to conflict, this is often a big factor when it comes to resolving disputes and mental state in trying to solve workplace disputes between parties. Now, in any organization, having an element of conflict is expected, it's inevitable. You've got people with different opinions, attitudes, strengths, weaknesses, they're all working together in what can be probably a very stressful and demanding environment. And it's not to say that conflict is a bad thing. In most cases, or some cases at least, conflict can be a positive. It can be a way to have individual or team creativity. It can be a way to solve problems. You can have healthy competition. But the issue is often, if it remains unresolved or it's poorly managed, it can lead to a whole host of other problems. And for those of you who are into conflict resolution or mediations, you understand the cost of conflict, whether it's stress and anxiety, time off through absenteeism or sickness, decreased productivity. It affects the bottom line in terms of finances, employee turnover, grievances, litigation, etc., etc. So obviously no workplace will be entirely free of conflict, as there's always going to be situations when people disagree on things, and you'll always have two people who maybe just don't get along. However, what I find interesting is the mental health related factors also can play a big part in unresolved conflict, and that also will have a huge impact on not just the individuals but also the organization as well. And so there was some research that was done in 2014 which looked at the cost of mental health issues at work. So I think it was in 2014, a report was done focusing on the mental health of the nation, and it was specifically relating to mental illness at work. Now, some of the findings of that, you can see there on your screen, millions of days lost in the UK due to mental health or mental illness in 2013. Stress, depression and anxiety has increased by 24% since 2009. The average employee takes maybe 7 sick days a year, and 40% of this is due to mental health problems. And employers often spend up to 2.4 billion a year replacing members of staff who had to leave their jobs because of mental ill health. So, as Giles was saying earlier, mental health is just as important as physical health. And I think employees, employers, and mediators need to be more aware of the fact that mental health or mental ill health is common. 1 in 4 of us will probably suffer from some form of mental health in any 1 year. It's quite likely that one day you, one of your friends or colleagues, a family member may experience a mental health problem, yet mental illness for some reason is still surrounded by whether it's prejudice, ignorance, or fear. So I think in the type of work that we do, we're always aiming to be impartial, non-judgmental, non-biased, yet there is still a huge amount of stigma and discrimination around mental health. Now, you've got organizations such as Mind and campaigns such as Time to Change, which is really working to bring the topic of mental illness out in the open. However, the fact still remains that there is some stigma surrounding mental health or mental ill health, and it means that people are often quite uncomfortable tackling the subject. And this is true for mediators as well as the general population. Why is that? Well, it could be that, the unawareness or the attitudes that people have towards anyone with a mental health problem means that it could be fear or uncertainty on how to maybe manage or resolve the conflict. And if mental health is a factor, that's going to be a huge, sense of anxiety in not wanting to make the situation any worse. So it could be a genuine concern about wanting to not make a situation look worse than it is, but it also, I think, is a huge amount based on the mental health perception that people have. And what I find is often there is a huge amount of stereotypes around mental health, and yet we really very conform to those stereotypes. For example, I have a close friend of mine who has been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and yet at times they have a very positive state of mental health. So I think what is important is how mental health is managed, how conflict is managed. And, there's been cases where, it may have been suggested or confirmed that there's implication of mental health. And I think that we need to probably reflect on our own biases and assumptions around the issue, as this will often directly influence maybe whether we take a case, how we manage the process, our own judgment and impartiality towards the parties involved. And it's just about how is this going to be managed, not just when it comes to actually mediation, but managed in the workplace for the organization beforehand. So if we take a look at managing conflict in mental health, I think that it's common for managers to notice that employees are experiencing mental health challenges, and often it could be that it's just a difficulty in maintaining healthy working relationships. Now, when your mental health is out of balance, it can influence your thoughts, your perceptions can be distorted, and it could be in a way that you may perceive that people are judging you, criticizing you, or they're threatening you and your work. And it's not my role to say whether that is or is not the case. But at the same time, people can experience self-doubt, low self-esteem, irritability, difficulties with memory, concentration, and we all have different areas of mental health and mental ill health, just like physical health. They both can change throughout our lives, and like our bodies, we can become mentally unwell. So I think it's worthwhile looking at, what is mental health? So in essence, it's the mental and emotional state in which we feel able to cope with the normal stresses of everyday life. So if we're feeling good about ourselves, we can often work productively, we interact well with our colleagues, and we can often make a valuable contribution to our team and the workforce and who we engage in. Mental ill health, however, can range from feeling a little bit down to common disorders like anxiety and depression. And often in limited cases, it can lead to severe mental illness like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia. Now, when people are under pressure at work, it can lead to stress and anxiety. And a short period of stress on its own is not likely to be considered a disability under law. But prolonged stress can become much more serious and make existing mental health problems much worse. So I think it's important to try and understand and address why mental health is important. So the CIPD recently did a study which highlighted the impact on businesses around poor mental health, and the study found that 37% of sufferers are more likely to get into conflict with colleagues. 57% found it harder to juggle multiple tasks. 80% found it difficult to concentrate. 62% thought it took longer to do tasks, and 50% are potentially less patient with customers and clients. So this is, this may be a factor in some of the rising workplace disputes between individuals. And maybe if we're unaware or unsympathetic to mental health issues or factors, this can often be a factor in the performance of behaviours.
The stats right at the bottom there, 50% of people say they're less patient, and that's just cries out why people who are experiencing mental ill health find themselves getting into conflict. If the core root of them is struggling to engage at any level, obviously that's going to lead to difficulties interacting.
Of course. And so, I think it's prudent to maybe just take a very, quick snippet as to what are mental health problems. And again, we're not therapists, and we're not trying to make a clinical diagnosis, but it's just to raise awareness and understanding. Because mental health problems, it can affect the way that you think, the way you feel, the way you behave. And, some mental health issues that, we often hear about quite commonly, things like, depression or anxiety. These are words that are used in our everyday language. And because of that, because we hear it every day and we're so used to it, it can mean that, we maybe underestimate how serious these can be. But, we cannot expect us as mediators to be experts in mental health assessments, but what we can do is try and understand the emotional and behavioral impact of mental health conditions in the mediation process. So many individuals with, challenging mental health problems will have their own particular habits, behaviors, and reactions to their mental ill health, whether it's anxiety, depression, psychosis, phobias. It can show itself in different ways with different people. So the question, that I want to ask is mediation, will mediation be a helpful process? Is mediation appropriate for resolving disputes involving mental ill health? So that's the first question that I'm going to place out to you. Do you think that mediation is useful or could be useful in resolving disputes involving mental health? So I'll give you a few minutes to give us some feedback there based around whether you think that mediation is useful or that potentially it can be unuseful in that situation.
So obviously you've got the facility to type a question, and so please do.
Okay, so we're getting some feedback. A lot of you are saying that yes, mediation is useful, and yes, why wouldn't it be? If two parties want to resolve their dispute and have self-determination to do so, then like all mediation cases, the decision to mediate lies with the parties. And as Adrian just said, it's the approach that needs to be very different. Now, I totally understand the concerns that I have had and other people may have on taking on these particular types of cases. And that's another reason why we're holding the mediation and mental health CPD event in January. It's for trained mediators who want to gain a little bit more insight into some of the tools and techniques that can be used to try, or considerations when taking on mediation cases. But, what is our role and responsibility in that process, and, do you think there are times when mediation should or should not go ahead? So, if you come to our CPD masterclass, and obviously we'll aim to answer all of those questions and a few more, I've got some thoughts on it, and we won't be able to obviously have a big exclusive look into what is an incredibly complex situation. But some of my thoughts, is in essence our roles as mediators. Now, some of the mental health disorders that you can experience have come up before, but our role is, it's not our role to diagnose the party or treat them as a patient. We shouldn't, as mediators, be trying to deny anybody who has a self-determination or volition, to deny them access to the mediation. And we can't necessarily always make the assumption that mental illness is linked to the parties or their competency to mediate. Now, mediation may not be appropriate where there are any risks to the safety of the individual or a fair agreement. So, for example, if there's a history of violence between any of the parties, or if there was maybe a serious power imbalance, so maybe where one can take advantage of the other. But I'm fully aware that some mediators may be mental health professionals, but the role of the mediator is not that of a therapist or a medical practitioner. There is, however, no doubt that the mental and emotional issues facing the parties can impact a person's capacity to mediate. So what is, when we say capacity to mediate, what are we talking about?
Yeah, and just before we move on, Adrian has asked a very interesting question about, or made a statement saying that he believes that for mediation to work, as mediators, we have to understand the condition that that person is experiencing. And the example he gives is PTSD. I don't know what you think, Jerome, but my view is perhaps it's better to, as a layman, to ask how that condition affects them rather than trying to,
assume what you think, or biases or prejudice. Obviously, you may come from a place of knowing, but again, I think it's always better for the party to be the one to explain to you their experiences and how it's impacted them, because then you can move forward and see, well, how can we accommodate to your needs based around me deciding what I think may be most beneficial or useful to you. And we're not in a position to necessarily determine a party's mental health status. we're probably more qualified to ensure, is that party able to participate in the mediation in a meaningful way. So fundamentally, what we want is we want to be able to, be sure that a party understands what is happening and what is being discussed, and that they're able to speak on his or her behalf. And by that I mean, the ability to follow conversation, articulate opinions clearly, concentrate on and understand the issues at hand. And it also means, clearly understanding what's being agreed during the mediation, and being able to follow through on those responsibilities or obligations as has been outlined in the agreement. So while it's not the mediator's role to be, to be judgmental, biased, or make assumptions, it is the role of the mediator to assess and evaluate the ability of the parties to engage in the mediation process in a meaningful way.
Yeah, for me, it's the litmus test is, are these people having a conversation, or is one of them unable to continue the conversation because of, and in this case, a mental ill health condition. It might be that they are unable to be part of mediation for all sorts of reasons. But if you can pass that litmus test of they are engaged in this conversation, then the mediation for me can continue.
I agree, and to follow up on the point you said before about asking questions, before the mediation, if we do have some concerns or we see things, it's we can ask questions about the person's ability to concentrate, their ability to cope with stress, particularly during the mediation. So although those things don't necessarily indicate that there are problems, they're examples of where somebody's capacity to mediate may be compromised because of some issues based around mental ill health. But my perspective based around it is that rather than try and dismiss a case as unsuitable for mediation, there may be times when as a mediator we can start to explore whether we could make reasonable adjustments to the process, and so that the person can still participate. So we want to be able to assist the parties wherever possible, to empower them to make their own decisions, especially about things that are going to affect them directly. So for this, I think that we should be proactive in asking participant questions about their emotional well-being. Do they think that there are any barriers that may impede their ability to participate in a mediation? So yes, I agree with Adrian. I think it's helpful for mediators to have some knowledge of mental health problems and be familiar with the type of symptoms that participants may talk about, or present in the mediation. But this is not for the purpose of providing a clinical diagnosis. It's there to assist the mediator and the parties on how to plan together how to best structure the mediation and accommodate their needs. So we've got something else come up here. Can the mediation not continue through the person's representative where the person who has mental ill health has agreed to do this? So when it comes to representation in mediation, I think it's always just best to think about what are some of the concerns, fears, or anxieties that that person may have about wanting to bring representation into a mediation. Now, if we can explore that and we can put aside some of those fears, concerns, and anxieties, they may not necessarily want to have a representative in there, because us as the mediators should ideally be creating that safe space where people can participate, and understand that their needs will be looked after and met. If somebody wants to bring a representative into the mediation process for the basis of, unbiased, I would have to then ask the other party whether they would agree and they're happy for someone to bring another person into mediation process, and also allow that other person to bring somebody too. So now there may be cases in mental health, for example, where somebody may be prone to emotional outbursts, and so the fact that having someone there may assist them in being able to participate because it puts them at ease. Those are some of the recommendations or some of the reasonable adjustments that may be necessary to be made to allow the mediation to proceed and move forward. But our willingness, I think, as mediators to make accommodations for parties who have mental health often it will at times reflect maybe our own attitudes and values about these conditions. My experience has shown me that most individuals, whether mentally healthily or have mental ill health, can successfully participate in mediation, especially with some reasonable adjustments being made. So, when we talk about reasonable adjustments, what are we talking about? So it could be that you allow someone to participate in a mediation. A person with anxiety disorder might be given, let's say, frequent breaks in order so that they can calm down in a stressful situation. They may be allowed to sit closer to the door because, so that they don't feel trapped. Someone who's got depression and they're being treated with medication, the medication may make them drowsy in the morning. So you may want to reschedule your mediation slightly earlier, again, if agreed, so that the person is able to participate more fully. And accommodations can be made in many different areas. In order to make these type of adjustments, we need to, prior to the information to mediation, gather as much information about what would help these particular individuals. So I think our willingness to make adjustments combined with a very flexible approach is often all that's needed in assisting participants with mental health to benefit from mediation. So unfortunately, the one thing that remains constant about mental health is that there really are no real certainty. Mediation with participants who are challenged by mental ill health is no doubt a challenge for any mediator. And that's why we're looking to hold a specific masterclass in January, which really looks in much more detail than we have today about some of the issues around mediating in mental health. So raising awareness about common conditions and symptoms, really understanding about assessing the capacity to mediate. Who decides that? Are there particular behaviors that are mediatable? What criteria are we using to decide someone's capacity to mediate? Looking at also our own values, our own triggers and prejudices. What are we bringing to the mediation that could affect that? Looking to expanding our capacity to provide mediation, in a much more inclusive way, despite of any preconceived fears or prejudice that we have. We'll take a look at specific case studies, with different areas to look at. We'll have role plays and just start to look at how we can make our interventions around mental health much more effective. So, we're inviting you to attend our CPD event masterclass on the 15th of January. And, it will be looking to increase your knowledge around the mental health area much more than I think has been done so far in my particular training.
This is part of and the start of a conversation. We would really appreciate to open the conversation up. So please do contact us. Let's have a discussion about it. In that CPD event and outside. I think it's a topic which both me and Jerome are finding increasingly happens in quite a lot of mediations we're doing, and it's a sort of it's a growth topic. Unfortunately, as we said, 1 in 4 people will experience some form of mental health in their life. So it's something which you will definitely come across either directly as a mediator or in the rest of your working life. So it's definitely a topic that we want to,
of course,
open that discussion to.
It's crucial to acquire knowledge and develop your awareness around these issues. I think it's well worth anybody's time and interest, because ultimately you will become much more effective, not just as a mediator, but in understanding mental health and its social capacity. So, if you are interested in finding out more about our mediation training and our mediation in mental health CPD event, please do contact our business development team. The details are up on the screen for you too, and there will also be a copy of the slides made available after the webinar today. So before we kind of close, I just want to give a last few summary and helpful tips when it comes to mediating in mental health, and these things again will be discussed in much more detail during the event that we're holding in January. So I think it's important to have the same approach as you do with any client. I think it's important to prepare well to mediate, because preparing well to mediate with mental health will make us better mediators generally. Make it your practice to ask questions about people's general state of well-being in the preparation before the mediation as well as during it. Gather information about non-mental illness within the party. If there's a problem, explore what they may need to do so that they can help to manage any illnesses or symptoms, so that you can facilitate the process creatively and problem solve around their specific needs. Make reasonable adjustments so that people have access to mediation. Ask yourself as a mediator the questions: how can I be as inclusive as possible here? I think more than anything, it's just about demystifying and taking the fear surrounding mental health and making it become much less daunting. So
I'm going to say that, for me, the expert on that condition is the party. So, ask them. They will most times be able to suggest what they need and explain how it affects them. So listen to them and go from there. Let them be the expert on their condition, because they know it, they live it.
Thank you, Giles. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to say thank you for listening to us today. Again, please do get in contact with us if you have any questions or queries in relation to mediating in mental health, or any inquiries in general. You can find us at our emails address that I've included there. Giles and I are also at LinkedIn, and you can obviously contact us at TCM and find out more information about the events coming up, and also about the wonderful work that we do in general at the TCM Group website. So thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all the success in your future mediations. Thank you.